Good afternoon, everyone. Chris the Contemplative here for another episode of Are You Spiritual? Thank you so much for joining me on this series. Let's see where it takes us. I find this discussion to be important no matter how many people tune in because ideas are important. And without ideas that are challenging other ideas, we're not going to learn anything. That is a basic premise of life. So we're going to get started. And I would like to start with lyrics from a song from one of my favorite Australian metal bands, Northlane. And pray for Australia. Australia is in such a bad state. If you look at how they're enforcing the mandates against the COVID pandemic, it is extremely draconian. It is extremely authoritarian, and there's a lot of protests going on. So pray for them. Pray that there be common sense that doesn't shut down human basic rights and kills more people than it's trying to save. But I will read these lyrics in a poetic way. I'm not going to sing it because that would be awkward, and I think it's better to read it slowly. So here we go. Have you tried turning it off, taking a break? When nobody is watching, do you make the same mistakes? Is it loud in there? It echoes on and on. White noise poisons all your choices, haunting you in different voices. Praying I go deaf in this echo chamber. Praying I go deaf in this echo chamber. Something's gotta give sooner or later. Praying I go deaf in this echo chamber. The free mind of a stranger sears the tether to your brain. It cuts you deep. You feel ashamed. The only thing that matters is what you can create. So that was an excerpt. That's not the full pentameter of the song. And of course, it being a song, it would have a completely different context musically. But I think those are the most important lyrics as to what I'm talking about. So maybe you've heard these terms. Maybe you've heard the term echo chamber thrown around. It's a very important term. It's a psychological and sociological term that has been completely observed throughout human behavioral patterns. And it just seems very odd that there are people that claim to have certain philosophies, claim to have their own understanding of the meaning of life, their own grasp on truth, and yet they act so immature when it comes to anything that challenges their paradigm for truth. A lot of people have observed that there's more going on than just an echo chamber, but an echo chamber is one of the first aspects of NPC spirituality. Now, let me define some terms. Defining terms is extremely important when you are seeking truth and trying to find some substance in what you find to be metaphysical, which means beyond the physical, the abstract, the spiritual, or the physical. You have to define terms. The first term I'm going to define is NPC. The NPC is a non-playable character in a video game who has particular set scripts programmed into them. You go up to them for particular missions and quests, you perform them, and then their script changes completely on how the program is scripted. Usually, in poorly put together games, it's obvious that they have scripted patterns of speech. Whereas the playable character, which is you, can have a lot more diversity in choice of words and actions. So that's where this term comes from, if anyone was wondering. I didn't really make it that clear in my trailer. For those that don't play video games, there you go. That's what it means. And it was used in political satire, as you can see, with these monotone wojaks here, that these particular patterns can be seen in how people discuss politics and certain controversial hot topic things that involve a lot of emotion. This is, of course, a consequence of social programming, of echo chambers brought to you by the media. And regardless of where you regardless of where you sit on the political spectrum, we all get frustrated at each other's echo chambers, some more than others. But it seems like people on both sides throw this term around. And although I have my own beliefs, I can definitely see that there's an awareness growing on both sides that the mainstream media, this monopoly on particular choices of set narratives on what to believe and what is right and wrong, is running its course. It's making people scratch their heads. And when people don't get what the news is telling them, and when they start resisting against it, those that follow the news or those that completely believe almost religiously in that narrative, they freak out. They have a panic attack, right? We've all had that triggered person who can't handle an outside possibility or another opinion disrupting their poor little baby playpen of ideas. And that's always bad. I would say I would call out a conservative acting like that, just as much as I would call out a leftist. And the reason why it's so bad is because it's attacking and insulting human intelligence and our potential to learn more about each other. So that's what an echo chamber is. That's one element of why we have NPC spirituality. Now, you could say that my term doesn't make sense, NPC spirituality. What does the NPC political satire have to do with spirituality? Well, first of all, according to my definition of spirituality, that everything we do is technically spiritual. It is spiritual. It is involving people and their moral decision making and what they find meaning in. Second of all, the way people act is very religious. There is a lot of worship of self or worship of particular governmental beliefs and political systems, worship of government itself. For me, that is spiritual. Okay, people are putting all of their existential eggs in one basket. And thirdly, there is within the realm of religion and spirituality such a dark age of just complete confusion and idiocy that I would say it's almost a spirituality to be this emotional, dumbed down person who jumps around from one thing to another for their own convenience's sake. And this you can see a lot in Western civilization. So that's why I made this term NPC spirituality. So continuing to the second foundation of NPC spirituality is cognitive dissonance. Okay, cognitive dissonance is when you have this extreme emotional reaction to something that collides with your value system, and we all have it. Okay, we all internally or externally express it. We have our own insecurities and we have our own biases. Cognitive dissonance manifests itself more than just being angry at someone or telling them to shut up or trying to dismiss them. It also comes in this strange form of avoidance. You'll see people often, when they lose an argument on the internet, they may not just flip out on you and call you every name in the book. They may just ignore you or purposefully stop talking to you or call you a name to dismiss you. That to me is a sign of cognitive dissonance. And where does that lead anyone? It doesn't lead anyone into anywhere except more questions and animosity. You have these just awful, awful behavioral patterns. It really feels like some kind of giant middle school on the internet. And it's not with kids, it's with adults. No one learns anything. Everyone just wants to talk over each other. It's horrible. There was a time where you could be civil, agree to disagree, and slowly but surely, although you can't completely get rid of your confirmation bias, you can learn a few things. You can adjust a few things. Confirmation bias is another problem where you see people, and I see this in a lot of, I would say, evangelical Christians and atheists. They look around for different information, but they use it to spin their own narrative or back up their own preconceived notions of what they believe. So no matter what you tell them, they will create some kind of excuse or reason, or perhaps they will take something out of context and cherry pick just to back up what they believe, even though the next two sentences may go against what they believe. You can even see this in the scientific arena. You had this huge hysteria over global warming, a la Al Gore and his ilk, making tons of money off of that. And what they would clearly do is cherry pick certain times of the year to suit the narrative that all the polar ice caps are melting and we're going to be dead in 10 years. Did that happen? No. Did the polar ice caps melt a little bit? Yes. Was there climate change? Yes, there was climate change. But it did not match their previous assertion of 2012 or what was the other movie? What was The Day After Tomorrow? I can't remember the other disaster movie about global warming. Let me just check that out here. I have Google. I can check that out real quick. The Day After Yes, The Day After Tomorrow, right? That was the first wave of climate change hysteria. Then they changed global warming temporarily to global cooling. And then they changed it to climate change. So now we're having this idea that there's man-made climate change, and it goes up and down. And it's clear that there is this confirmation bias going on within people that are very smart, but they don't have the maturity or humility to really check themselves on that. They're just interested in an agenda. So this is what leads to NPC spirituality, at least some of it. Now, what is the danger of this? In the realms of thought, people usually have this echo chamber of themselves. We all have the internet in the modern Western world. We can comfortably sit in our apartments or homes with their air conditioning and heating system. We have clothes, we have food, we find it much easier to get employed than other places in the world. We're relatively pretty spoiled. Even people that are technically in the poverty line have welfare. They can still enjoy modern convenience. So because we have a surplus of resources, we really subconsciously don't take it as serious as we think, because we don't see the consequences of playing around with ideas or using ideas or twisting ideas for an agenda. We don't see that until way later. Now, one example of it happening is what's going on with the current lockdowns and all the controversy with that. And of course, people are now seeing that this is just another manifestation of governmental overreach, which many people warned about long time ago, but no one listened. So there's clearly an issue with comfort and laziness, even if in our conscious minds we think, yeah, I'm taking this seriously. I figured out the meaning of life. You really aren't, because you just look at how people manage their time. You look at how poorly they can put together arguments, and you look at just the lack of the improvement in their lives and how they're bouncing around from thing to thing. It's really not that serious. So what happens? Well, there are a few things that happen if you're not aware of NPC spirituality. First, you have confusion and breakdown of language, which we'll go into later. So if I throw around words that are very nuanced and there are massive ideological, controversial takes on each word, and yet I throw it around all the time, there will be a breakdown of language and therefore a breakdown of meaning. You will have many people that seem to have some kind of insight, and it's deceptive or it doesn't mean anything, it's just empty. And people will retweet that or repost that and basically put up idiots at the top who don't know what they're talking about as gospel. So that's the first thing that happens. Just complete fools who are, or they're not even fools, they're genuinely malevolent people who want to make use of the ignorance. The second thing you have is moral relativism. So you have everyone claiming that they have religious experience or their own religious idea. And what happens is it becomes harder to delegate between particular people in society on how to manage things in a peaceful and charitable way that leads to the best outcome for everyone, because everyone has these kooky ideas that are way out there, or even worse, they have their own justifications for doing evil. You see this with the BLM and Antifa movements, for example. There's a justification for breaking up that poor person's business who had nothing to do with anything. Well, there's an overall ends to justify the means as to why I murdered that person in cold blood. And it just trickles down and down. And then we have hot topics like abortion, which has tons of this, as well as big government and voting in something that clearly is going to snowball into something much worse. There's all kinds of issues, but all of these issues stem from the echo chamber. They stem from the NPC spirituality of these childish notions and childish people, and I can be one of them, okay? I'm not talking like I've mastered this at all, okay? I'm putting myself in the same boat. We all have these issues, but we have to be real about them. But we won't build anything truly great if everyone is in their own little world, and that's what's happening. Another thing that happens is you have this artificial sense of one's goodness and virtue with all these false enlightenments going on. You know, people have so much big talk. They have such big mouths when it comes to, well, this is what I believe, and I think this is correct. And they talk and they talk and they talk. And the people that talk the most generally are full of it. I noticed that many of these people who not only have fallacious arguments in their reasoning, but also jump from one thing to another. You'll see them. You'll see, like, well, wait a minute, didn't you believe in that last year? No, 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 I didn't. Or maybe in high school, didn't you say this? Oh, no, no, I didn't. Well, you really did. You just said this right here. Well, you said this last year. What about 5 years ago? Well, that's different. And so you have this very strange thing where a lot of these people, if they're not involved in cancel culture, they do get canceled, right? A lot of the people involved in cancel culture or people that are just full of themselves get canceled because they be they be I don't know, they just become hypocrites, or they jump around so much they lose their footing and they don't really go anywhere. Then you look at their personal lives and you just think about all of their ridiculous Instagram, be positive, believe in yourself, self-help, requoting Buddha, requoting, I don't know, what else they requote? Requoting Elon Musk, all of these just big, abstract, highfalutin quotes on their social media pages. And you really get to know them personally, and you're like, I don't think this person is as nice as they think they say they are. Or at the very least, they don't seem to me like a heroic person who really thinks of others and, turns the other cheek for enemies and tries to make peace. Despite all of their talk, where is that in this society? So whether it's an emotional experience or it's a fallacious intellectual argument, we are lacking something big time which prevents us from truly growing. And this facade that people put on, you can go into I use the hashtags to get people's attention on the show. I use spirituality and meditation. And you can find all kinds of gurus and wannabe meditative experts, and of course, then there's prayer groups and pray this prayer and this will happen. And they have millions of views on there, and you have thousands of comments and, oh, this is wonderful. Yes, I feel the cosmic energy, the love. I love everybody. Love, love, love the chakras. Or, oh, Jesus loves everyone. And if you really know people that are into that kind of emotionalism, or they talk like they have become holier than the Pope and Mother Teresa, and you know them personally, you may notice, and I'm not going to name any names because these are nameless people. This could be anyone. This could be your Uncle Louie. This could be your sister. This could be anyone. You may notice that these people are not as virtuous as they say they are. You may recollect how they've screwed people over. They don't forgive. They may flip out if you don't have the same political opinion. So you have this la la land going on in terms of how people think they're virtuous and good, and it doesn't match up with reality. A lot of the times, the ideologies don't match up with reality, so they can just justify things, or they can just, I don't know, they don't get challenged. They're in an echo chamber. No one would challenge them anyway. They would cancel them before they could even hear it. And this all leads into narcissism. Okay, so you have these narcissistic tendencies and ideas in culture and in spirituality. You also have superficiality and echo chambers where no one gets challenged on their beliefs and practices and asked about the fruits of these practices. And this all eventually leads to a very sick mind, a narcissistic mind. Now, you may say to yourself, if you, let's just say you're watching and you may be falling into narcissism, and you may think, well, maybe you're a narcissist, or, well, you're just trying to dismiss what I believe in, or what do you know? You're a Christian male, or whatever it is. I'll just say this. I have known people that are narcissists in my life, and friends of friends have. What happens when you think you're the center of the world, or you think you're just fine, or you love yourself so much that you become indifferent to everyone else's opinions and everyone else? You always think you're correct. Well, quite simply, what happens is you don't get away with it. I usually see these people that become narcissistic become very depressed and angry people. There's something within the narcissist to me that deep down shows, in their subconscious at least, that they aren't as great as they think they are. You can see this when they seem to eventually do their rounds and bother other people, or try to get attention and pretend they're the expert. You can see this insecurity. And you can also see this insecurity in their belief systems. Their belief systems must have the perfect confirmation bias and justification for their current way of life. They can never have an ideology that challenges their way of life. And that's a sign. Another thing that happens is something called death and suffering one day smacks them upside the head. And they can't handle it. Their egos are crushed, despite the fact that they may say, I'm the most humble person ever, or I have experienced ego death when I was a hippie, or whatever it was. They flip out, they can't handle true reality, and their life falls apart. Their mental health or their physical health falls apart. Eventually, people walk away from them when they wise up to the fact that this is a narcissistic person pretending to be good. And if you believe in belief systems like mine, their very souls may be lost. They may be condemned by the very truth that they claim to be. The truth that they constantly proclaim, the lies that they constantly proclaim as truth, eventually turn out not to be a little fun little tool in their narcissistic toolbox, but an actual person that has true power over everything. And when they close their eyes, when they pass from this mortal realm, they realize that they deceived themselves. that they are the most miserable, most insecure, and the least powerful of all, that they are the least in the eyes of the truth, and that they are found wanting. And that misery that they have in their hearts continues eternally. So you don't want to be a narcissist. And even if you're not a Christian, a lot of religions that may have some of the truth, I may not completely agree with them, believe that narcissism is not the way to go. Okay? Yeah, even though I may not have the same religious beliefs as a Taoist or a Buddhist, we have to get used to this idea that there are very smart people who are able to peer into the cycles of civilization and human behavior, and they know what a narcissist is, and they see what a selfish, egocentric person, what happens to that person. They know the fate of that. Okay, you don't have to exactly believe in what I believe to see how that doesn't turn out so well. So that's what happens in NPC spirituality. Now, I want to make a quick assertion here on bias. We are all biased. And I would say that one exercise you could do is to write down your biases and be as honest as you can with yourself about things you don't want to hear. Now, here's the problem. Is every bias and every kind of mental discrimination bad? I would say no. Okay, we don't want to go into a kind of ideological anarchism or an ideological libertarianism where because everyone has bias, that means we need to throw away every idea that we do not completely understand. I don't believe in that at all. I think that people are people. Some people get it more right than others, but we're all limited. And if you can say that people in the past can get things wrong, then being that you logically are also a person, that means that you can get things wrong. And if you can get things right and you're a person and the people in the past are people, then logically the people in the past may have many things correct. So let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater. Let's not throw out our traditions. Let's be real. Okay, you need education. You need to learn from your elders in order to survive in the world. Where will we be without our parents? Where will we be without some kind of education? How could we have a living? How could we function if we didn't have something to support us? So let's not get crazy here. Okay, that's one thing I want to say in case people are saying I'm a total individualist. No, I'm a Catholic individualist. That's a completely different thing. And here's another problem that I see on bias. There is such a bias that isn't necessarily wrong, but just misses something. And one of these biases, which I agree on, and I think that many people in the academic sphere agree on, is that logic and scientific thinking, you may have heard of the scientific method, comes from Aristotle, the very analytical way of thinking. Does we have a hypothesis, you test a hypothesis, does it make sense? Can we put it under a microscope? I would say that that does not have the ultimate hold on truth. I think this is very important when it comes to spirituality. You have these people who run around beating everyone upside the head with logic, the atheist who says there's no proof of it, blah, 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 blah. All the while, the atheist believes in math, which is technically an abstract field. It's technically metaphysical in many ways. All the while, they have no answer for the matters of the heart, of the soul, and they definitely are very weak on morality and transcendent truth. And of course, on top of that, they really don't have much of an answer for more coherent intelligent design, like the fact that there is such a low mathematical possibility of life forming on Earth by chance, And of course, you have things like the Big Bang Theory, which was created by a Jesuit priest, which definitely backs up a creationist way of looking at things. So let's not go into this thing of, well, if I can't completely understand it, it's not true. Because then you're actually, not only are you cutting yourself out from a whole school of thought, but you're cutting yourself out from different ways of thinking. Did you know that there's different ways of thinking? There is. I mean, that's why you have different fields in university. But there's Thomistic thinking, there's Platonic thinking, or Neoplatonist thinking. There's Hegelian dialectics. There's different ways where we can ask questions and observe things to make sure we're getting closer to the truth and we're not just making stuff up in our heads. So we can have a balance between mystery and objective truth. Okay, we can have objective truth. A lot of people can't really argue with the Ten Commandments. Did you know that? A lot of people, when they really look at it, even if they don't believe in the Judeo-Christian belief system, they really don't have much of a response against that. Even George Carlin, who's an atheist, he agreed with it. He just said it needs to be simplified to don't be a jerk or something, which was really tongue-in-cheek and really reductive. But okay, George Carlin, I mean, I get it. So you can have the mystery, you can have experiences that go beyond yourself that you may not completely understand, but you have to be humble about it. You have to remind yourself how big the universe is and not immediately put your whole assertion onto it, just completely project what you want out of it. Right? So you have this story of the elephants and the gurus, right? The three blind gurus. Has anyone heard that one? If you haven't, just let me know. So there was a story, if I got this right, there was a story of a king in the East who wanted to understand what an elephant was like. So he sent three blind wise men to India or wherever, Africa, wherever the elephant was. And one of the wise men grabbed the trunk and felt the trunk, and the other one grabbed the leg, and another one felt the belly of the elephant. And they went back to the king, and they all gave the king different descriptions of the elephant. Did they not experience the elephant? Right? So we can't throw away the mystery. And we have to respect that there are experiences, but we have to always try to aim for making sense of it in the best way that we can objectively, even though that mystery may not be completely solved. I'd say that this is very reminiscent of the great thinkers that are found in science, right? We need to apply that spirit of Albert Einstein and Isaac Newton to our understandings of spirituality, to our understandings of the meanings of life. It would only be to our detriment if we didn't. So you can have your faith and hope, and you can have your intellect. All right, so let's move on. I had to build my case. Every time you are asserting something that is true, you need to start with questions and building your case. You also need to define your terms. I am sick of seeing people in these comment sections just saying, no, that's not true, and this is completely, totally false. And let me tell you a whole essay as to why that's wrong. And this is all the holes in your belief system. That is not the way to do it. That just shows that you are going to shout over that person. I mean, you could do it. There are times I'd say if someone was trying to argue for something morally abhorrent, I guess they don't deserve that much of an ear to be heard, but I really don't see much respect anymore, and much of the classical way to have a decent conversation. So there are some terms thrown around, and this is where I get into the meat of what I see in the culture as the NPC spirituality. This is the second rung of where we have to ask that question: are we spiritual? And I'm not going to get all the lingo, I'm sure, in this episode. I only have 25 minutes left. But I'm going to ask questions, and I'm going to hopefully open your mind to how you can't just throw around language. Okay? You can't just throw around language without applying the proper context. So you have the term spirituality, right? People say, I'm spiritual, but not religious. Well, I'm religious, but not spiritual. I never heard that one. But maybe someone is religious, but not spiritual. I'm not sure. So what is spirituality? Well, I looked up the definition. The Oxford Dictionary says it's the quality of being concerned with the human spirit or soul as opposed to material or physical things. However, the Merriam-Webster said it's beliefs passed down by a religious cleric or institution. So you have two colliding definitions of spirituality. Now, that's the dictionary. Then you have, within the Merriam-Webster dictionary definition, it talks about the religious cleric. And in the Oxford Dictionary, it says the human spirit or soul. Well, what about the term soul or spirit? It's like, okay, well, what's the human spirit or soul? So right then and there, can anyone define, take some time, can you define the spirit or the soul? Write down what you think that means. Write down what you think spirituality means. I really recommend having a notebook. Okay, sometimes it's better for me to not just lecture, but like in my class, you to take notes, to come to your own conclusions and ask yourselves questions. Well, the answer is that there is actually no concrete answer, because the terms spirit, soul, and spirituality are defined by multiple dogmas of religions. How in the world can people throw around the word spirituality? It makes no sense. You're talking about hundreds to thousands of years of thought by some of the smartest people in the world, and you're going to run around saying, I'm spiritual. All right, let's move on. I don't mean to be rude, but it's just, to me, that's what bothers me so much. Okay, there's no theology going on. Everyone just says, I'm spiritual. It feels so spiritual. Okay. All right, so how would you determine if something is spiritual? I'm not going to get completely into it, but we have another issue going on. We have the issue that after people discovered dissection and the human brain, and then we had brain scans and greater understanding of the physical organ of the brain and its importance in consciousness, this opened a whole can of worms. Before, in the ancient medieval world, it was a lot easier to say what the soul is and what spirituality is, because they didn't really have that understanding. They thought, well, maybe the mind is the whole body, or maybe our thinking is from a completely different plane of existence. Well, not really. It's not completely that. It's much more mysterious now, because the brain is very much important to how we think and come up with these concepts. And so you have people, let's just a dime a dozen person who does a hallucinogenic drug, okay? And they have an experience, and we've all heard it before if you've known these people. I felt like I was gone. My consciousness became one with the universe, man. Oh, I feel so enlightened. It's like, okay, well, here's an issue with that. If you rely on a drug which binds with particular neurotransmitters in your brain, then aren't you backing up the, let's say, atheist or secularist assertion that it's just a chemical compound in your brain? And therefore, if you are reliant on a chemical compound in your brain, then what's so spiritual about that? Isn't that a physical experience? Isn't that, not really concerning something beyond the physical? Uh-oh. we're in trouble now, right? So, so what is spiritual then? I may have just accidentally completely put into question the tens of millions of California citizenry that think they know what spirituality is. So looks like we're going to have to go to the drawing board. Um, the Buddhists that many people like to pretend they follow in this country, which is the good old US of A, would also say the same thing. Well, how is it spiritual? You're relying on something else. You're relying on a drug. It doesn't seem to show anything. So I would say, from what I can gather, there's two ways to see something spiritual. You're going to have a transcendent meaning that goes beyond your own will and your own emotions. So if I wake up feeling great, I had my coffee, the sun is shining, and I don't know, got a new car, and I'm just struck by the beauty of the rainbow outside, and I don't know, you're in a beautiful place somewhere in central Jersey or Japan, one of my, I'm out there in Yellowstone or hiking or whatever, and I have this burning fire in my heart, and I just love everybody, and the endorphins are flowing through my brain, and the dopamine's flowing through my brain. Is that spiritual? Well, I don't know. I would say it would have to have quite an effect on me. It would have to have an effect that goes beyond, that I take to the bank, that it changes me forever. Because if I wake up the next Tuesday and have to go to work and I end up road raging and killing someone in traffic, well, I don't know about how spiritual yesterday was. I mean, I just don't know. It's questionable. It really is. It really depends on the fruits of how it affects someone's life. And I would say the other way to tell something spiritual is the good old supernatural miracle angle, correct? I mean, if I have a prophecy and it comes true, if I speak in tongues that I shouldn't understand or I didn't have knowledge of, if I'm levitating, if I'm bilocuting, if I run into a shroud of Mother Mary in Mexico that never seems to rot away and millions of people visit and scientists still can't understand it, I would say that's pretty possible. If I have an incorruptible body, that doesn't make any sense, right? If I if I create many loaves of bread out of one, if I come back from the dead, okay, those count. Those are kind of important. I would also say that there is a more available but experience or lesser proof of that, which is the supernatural and mystical transformation of the soul through a religious practice. And what does that look like? Well, that's a lot more mysterious, but if someone drastically changes in the way they see things and has a positive virtue increase that is not affected as much, or at least the belief system does not change and they keep trying. They are rooted in something deeper themselves that makes them fight against themselves. I would say that that is spiritual. Okay. So this is something external from me. Uh, Chris, the contemplative, believes in turning the other cheek, and he still yells at his parents because they really pissed him off that day. But he goes to confession, or he feels remorse about it. He apologizes, and he consistently does that, and he tries his best not to give in to unjust anger. I would say that's spiritual. Okay, now we're talking. It's something outside of ourselves. Okay. So where did this all come from in terms of this hooey about what is spirituality and these dime a dozen gurus taking over the internet, and there's only 4 people watching here, right? There's very few people talking like me, and there's millions of people talking like Mr. Typical guru yoga man. Where did that come from? Well, unfortunately, because people don't know how to ask questions, when social media brought every soccer mom and boomer and I would say, armchair wannabe, has a college degree person who just wants to learn something a little bit extra, doesn't have time because they're in a different career. They don't really have time to look into the deeper stuff that's outside of their field. There's a great internet phone game. And a phone game is where people just repeat information, like this guy to the left of me, where he made a fake article. And fake article trolls happen all the time. People still fall for it. They fall for fake news because they just don't question it. And that's the appeal to authority fallacy, where you put too many eggs in the carton of the exploits, the experts or gods on Mount Olympus, and even when they stop making sense, you're still going to listen to them because, after all, they have a degree. Oh, I'm sure nothing like that's happening right now. You also have all these endless mediocre books. They're garbage. All these self-help books. A lot of the New Age started there. It's just all questionable personal experience about how I believed and Oprah Winfrey, it had happened, it came true. Completely subjective. And who knows? Who knows the truth? They could be scammers. They could be making money off of people buying their dumb book. Maybe it's not because of the law of the attraction. Maybe it's because you're buying their book about the law of attraction. Maybe they rented a car and a mansion under a different name or something. They're not rich, and now they really are rich because you bought their dumb book. All right, it's a lot like health fad diets. You see the same thing going on. People just jump from one thing to another. You don't see any progress, and it's like, who are these schmucks who keep telling us different information, keep saying that they're the Messiah, and it doesn't seem to really be helping anyone, but they seem to be making lots of money, aren't they? And then you just have this echo chamber Olympics. It goes on and on. And then you have experiential spirituality, which is very similar to the recreational drug thing. It's like, okay, so you woke up, you had this experiential experience, or you tried out this crystal. So what? It healed you, possibly. Even if it's real, even if the supernatural exists, how do we really know what happened there? I mean, you can be critical and still believe in the supernatural. Is this really positive? There are some people that believe that they're in something called deceptive spirits in many religions, including the Catholic faith. Christianity is I would say, the most popular, but even Native Americans and others believe that there's such a thing called deceptive spirits. It's like, okay, cute baby bear, and the bear is so cute, and maybe you can roll around with the baby bear, but eventually the bear is going to bite you, or mama bear is going to kill you. And so you're dealing with, it's like that attitude is being put into the supernatural realm. And if the supernatural realm is more complicated and expansive than the natural, then what would a supernatural criminal be like? Right? So if you can have a charlatan or a corrupt politician who gives you promises, and there's these entities that are way more intelligent than human beings and way more powerful, then why are we all assume that they're all good? Why do we assume that everything that's spiritual is good? I mean, someone going to hell is spiritual. I mean, that's a spirituality. That means you're going to hell. Everything for me is spiritual anyway. It doesn't really matter. What saying spiritual doesn't really mean anything. So it's just very murky, and people just go along with whatever they feel is good. And to me, that's no different from just shooting some heroin in your arm and seeing what happens. I mean, it's emotion. Okay? And so they go into these experiences, and they come out thinking that they are Siddhartha Gautama and Saint Therese de Lisieux fused into one, or they're the prophet Manny incarnate, or the Zarathustra. And they're really just repeating what they've heard other people say to try to make sense of their experience. And here are the following terms you may have heard. Ego, right? I had an ego death. I felt my consciousness go out into the ether. Well, okay, I have some questions. Why are you back from ego death? Why didn't you stay there? If we're all one, why did the universe become a lower life form? Why aren't we still one with the universe? That doesn't make any sense to me. And there's different definitions of ego, right? An ego death for a Buddhist means to rid oneself of desire. An ego death for a Jainist means to be completely pacifist and to be completely completely living out the rule of ahisma, which means you're a pacifist. You don't even kill bugs. Okay, that for at least for the religious Jains, they do that. An ego death for a Christian is to live out the gospel. Some of this may mean that you can live relatively normally in society, but be detached from things. Other definitions means you completely zone out and you just stop existing. What does that mean? Like, you just had this experience, you don't know what that means. And it certainly doesn't live out practically in the day-to-day life. I don't see these people living like they have much of an ego death. Love. There's another term that we seem to throw around. Which kind of love are we talking about? Okay? Love is defined in our Western tradition as 3 different kinds of love: filial, eros, and agape. How do you define love connected to sacrifice? Is love just being kind or feeling an emotional rush? And does that really live up to a reliable definition? I mean, people have so many broken relationships where they thought that it was the perfect thing and then it falls apart. I mean, how many times is Charlie Brown going to try to kick Lucy's football and keep falling on his face until he gets it? Don't be a sucker. Think. It doesn't mean you need to throw away emotions, but let's think about it before we throw around these terms. Non-dualism, man, this is a new one. They like to throw around the words non-dualism. Again, non-dualism is an Indian mystical and intellectual term that has to do with how they view the universe. It is different depending if you're a Buddhist, a Hindu, or a Jainist. The Jainists believe that you can everything is all one, including right and wrong to a certain extent, and existence and non-existence. Okay? The Buddhists have a problem with that. For example, listen to this quote from a Buddhist. A Buddhist logician, that's someone who deals with logic, Dharmakirti, ridiculed Anekantavada, which is non-dualism. With the differentiation removed, all things have dual nature. Then if somebody is implored to eat curd, then why does he not eat camel? The insinuation is obvious. If curd exists from the nature of curd and does not exist from the nature of a camel, then one is justified in eating camel, as by eating camel, he is merely eating the negation of curd. I like that one. So Mr. Vegan and Mrs. Vegan that believes in non-dualism, if you believe in a particular kind of non-dualism, technically, you're eating meat when you eat, you're eating Brussels sprouts or whatever. Well, those Brussels sprouts may have formed from the soil that formed from the carcass of an animal. Are you technically eating an animal if you're non-dualistic? Uh-oh, we're in trouble. Spiritual enlightenment, okay? Now, we have this issue with using the term enlightenment. Do you know how many schools of Buddhism there are? There's a few. Then there's Gnostic enlightenment, which was like this shadow religion that kind of stalked Christianity. Then there is the enlightenment through the Holy Spirit. Do you realize how many different kinds of enlightenments there are? There's a lot. There's a lot of enlightenments. But I'll tell you this. If enlightenment leads you to thinking that you are God and that you can control the universe, you are the least enlightened person ever. That's just the way it is. I don't see within any of those enlightenments, maybe a few, unless you're believing in the Luciferian occult tradition. That's a very rare one. Apparently it exists, was created by some guy, some former Satanist. Well, there you go. That's the one where you believe that, you have to love yourself, and you love yourself, and you are the mother goddess or whatever. That's, I would say, an occult, egoistic form of enlightenment. But most people with their heads on straight, usually find that enlightenment means you get humbled into the dirt. Consciousness, they're one of the most controversial terms ever, like especially with, again, the science that points towards the brain. Consciousness is still not understood by so many experts, scientists, and theologians. All have their own understanding of it. It's very, very mysterious on what consciousness actually is. I mean, the self, right? You can say, oh, I don't feel like myself, or I want to feel like myself. The self on the conscious level, Carl Jung usually found to be just emotions, okay? Emotions mixed with your super ego and your subconscious and your libido and your drives and your maybe a murky understanding of self actualization. It's a mess. We're a mess, okay? You can't just say, well, I feel like myself today. You really don't know much about your true self. I would say that's a universality throughout a lot of the belief systems I've seen, okay? All right, so that's the hippie side of things. Now, there's some issues with Christians as well, with just throwing these terms around. Tradition. Okay, tradition changes. If you really wanted to be the most traditional, you would have to travel on down to the Middle East, learn some Aramaic, and like run into those Ethiopian Christians, or go down to Africa, or maybe one of those Syrian Christians that have like some connection to like the first Christians that ever lived. If you really want to be the most old school, you'd have to go there. Those that say they're against tradition, like Protestants. Well, Protestants have many traditions, even though they say Bible only. Same with Catholics. I mean, there's a lot of infighting about which tradition should we do. Well, there's different rites within Catholics, and then of course the Orthodox might have something to say about how traditional we're being, and there's that whole thing there. So yeah, we need to get more educated here and really talk to each other and listen and try to explain what that means. To say something's biblical, there are so many issues with people taking verses out of context. There's so many books that people read that they would get mad if you said you're taking that out of context. You're taking Lord of the Rings out of context, or you're taking my Avengers movie out of context, or anything else like that. But it's okay to cherry pick from the Bible. It's also okay to remove books from the Bible. That has happened over the years after the Protestant Reformation. And it's also okay to just do not exegesis, but there's another one where you literally take what Jesus says, you ignore all the different translations throughout from Aramaic to Greek to Latin, and you just make up what you really think it means. Okay, so there is a serious integrity issue going on there. And if you really want to know more about the issues with the NPC Christian spirituality, check out Blue Collar Catholic. I should have linked him in the description. My apologies for that. But he's great. He goes into a lot of the hypocrisies in the Christian circles where there's just a lack of understanding and a lack of understanding the background of Christianity. It may humble you. It really may, whether you're Catholic or Protestant. And then, of course, you have this new thing going around, Yeshua, right? People are throwing around a word Yeshua, like if we say Jesus' name in the right way, he'll appreciate it more, he'll listen to us more. Absolute nonsense, absolute hogwash. I do not buy anything involving using a particular language to make God do something for you. I think that is mediocre, superficial. It is not the God who created the universe and all peoples. It is not the Lord of all nations, who is Jesus. It's just nonsense. And all of this stuff on the Christian NPC side, you dig deep enough and then you'll find that they are just repeating what other people are saying. Who knows? It might be Vito again. It could be 4chan trolling people. How do you know it's not a troll who's just making fun of you, spreading misinformation? Well, it's time to smash that pride a little bit and be patient and stop acting like you rule the roost just because you opened your little fortune cookie of information you found on the internet. Let's read some books. Let's get some better sleep. Let's learn something about logic and how to ask questions. You can check out the great courses. It's a free university course lecture system on the internet. You pay a little bit. You can learn college level courses on these many different things. Let's learn some history. Let's practice using our brains. There's some great exercises for the brain. There's logic. You can do math problems. You can do chess. Let's eat high natural fat. I heard is good. There's some herbs and natural supplements that can increase brain power. And let's mature a little bit, folks. Let's grow beyond NPC spirituality and on to the next level. And there's plenty of spiritual experiences that are authentic, that are even better than the drugs, that are even more meaningful than all the nonsense on there. Trust me, you're not missing anything. And you'll be truly at peace. Your life will start to make sense once again. You'll feel truly grounded, and you won't feel as insecure that you have to run around to one thing to another or beating everyone upside the head with your own takes on things. So that's it. I'm a little bit over time. God bless everyone. This is episode 2. Episode 3, I will go into supernatural tourism. I'll make a trailer on that. You'll see what I mean by that. But take care. And if you're interested in a rosary, that will be happening right now. I'll be jumping into the next stream for a rosary for our group. Bye-bye, everyone.